Sign the resignation or disappear. Elaine Carter didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. The conference room was small, windowless, and intentionally private. The kind of room used for decisions that were meant to leave no witnesses. My name is Landon Reese. For 15 years, I was director of operations, the person who kept the company moving when plans failed and executives panicked. Elaine was my sister-in-law, newly installed CEO, armed with an MBA, a sharp smile, and a belief that loyalty was an expense line to be cut. She slid a single sheet of paper across the table. "This is the clean option," she said. "You resign. We thank you for your service. You keep your reputation." She paused just long enough to let the threat breathe. "If not, we terminate you today." I waited for HR. They never came. I waited for legal. Silence. That was the first sting. This wasn't a process. It was a squeeze. The story you're about to hear is a dramatized narrative inspired by real workplace dynamics. Certain characters and events have been fictionalized for storytelling and educational purposes, with the assistance of AI to enhance emotional clarity. If this type of content isn't for you, feel free to step away, get some rest, and take care of yourself. Over the past month, my calendar had been quietly emptied. Strategy meetings vanished without explanation. Access requests stalled. By that morning, my company email no longer synced to my phone. Even internal dashboards I built myself returned polite error messages. Elaine called it restructuring. I recognized it as isolation. "You're blocking me out," I said. Elaine shrugged. "We're streamlining decision paths. You've become redundant. After 15 years of vendor negotiations, crisis containment, and systems that still ran because I knew where they broke first." She spoke like I was an outdated subscription she'd finally canceled. "You have 48 hours, she added. "Sign, or we escort you out." The room felt tight, airless. Not fear exactly. Something colder, a hard pressure behind the eyes. I realized she wasn't angry. She was confident. Confident I'd panic. Confident I'd beg. Instead, I folded the paper once and set it back between us. "I'll respond soon," I said. Elaine leaned back, satisfied. "Good. Be smart. Landon." I stood, steady enough to surprise myself. As I walked out, I met her eyes. She was already thinking ahead, counting savings, drafting announcements. Not this time. If this moment feels a little too familiar, take a second to check in with yourself. How are you really holding up today? Maybe turn on a soft lamp or open a window nearby. Just enough to make the space feel calmer while you listen. Tell me where you're listening from. I read every comment, and if you want to stay with this story until the truth surfaces, subscribe and keep going with me, because this is where things quietly start to shift. I didn't sleep that night, not because of fear, but because memory kept circling like a pressure point. 15 years don't disappear just because a new CEO decides they're inconvenient. I remembered the winter the supply chain collapsed and trucks sat idle for 3 days. I was the one who rewrote vendor terms overnight and kept production alive. I remembered the cyber breach everyone denied until systems started locking up. I stayed, coordinated, restored access, and absorbed the blame quietly so executives could save face. Elaine Carter never mentions those moments. To her, numbers are cleaner than people. She talks about margins, efficiencies, and future vision. Always future, never past. She doesn't see continuity as strength. She sees it as resistance. In meetings, she calls experience legacy drag, and she smiles when she says it. That smile is sharp, rehearsed, and empty. She didn't build this place. She extracted it. What hurts more is what happens at home. Mark avoids my eyes, answers questions with shrugs, leaves the room when my name comes up on his phone. He says Elaine is under pressure, that I should be flexible, that this isn't personal. That word lands wrong every time. Nothing feels accidental anymore. I start replaying conversations, late dinners, calls he took outside. I don't accuse him, but the doubt sits between us, heavy and unspoken. By the time morning comes, Anger has nowhere to go, so it folds inward. I review old project notes, archived emails, forgotten folders. This company didn't survive on vision decks. It survived on contingency plans, relationships, and systems I built to fail safely. Elaine can cut access, but she can't erase history. Then I find it. A scanned copy of my original employment agreement, signed years before Elaine ever had an office. No amendments, no replacement contract. Just clear language about compensation, ownership of processes, and conditions of separation. I sit still, reading it twice, then once more. The pressure eases slightly. Not relief. Focus. 15 years didn't vanish. They were documented. I closed the file and understood something else at the same time. Elaine thought leverage came from authority. Mark thought silence would protect him. They were wrong. The past was still active, still binding, still sharp. I didn't feel victorious yet, only steady, like someone who had finally found the edge of solid ground beneath me as the next move quietly formed inside. I wrote the resignation letter slowly, not because it was difficult, but because precision mattered more than emotion. One sentence was enough. Anything more would have sounded like negotiation, or worse. Apology. I printed it, signed it, and walked it to Elaine Carter's assistant without asking for a meeting. The letter stated that I, Landon Reese, resigned from my position as Director of Operations, effective only after full fulfillment of all contractual obligations owed to me under my original employment agreement. No gratitude, no farewell, just terms. Elaine skimmed it later that afternoon. She didn't call me in. She didn't argue. She smiled. The kind that assumes victory has already been logged. To her. This was a formality, a technical delay at most. She told HR to process it and moved on to the next item on her calendar. That night, my access remained restricted, but nothing else changed. Payroll still listed me as active. Benefits stayed untouched. I kept my badge, my title, my legal standing. Elaine believed she had boxed me out. In reality, she had boxed herself into language she didn't bother to read. The next morning, HR called. Not with anger, with confusion. They asked whether I had meant to reference a prior contract, one not reflected in their current system. I said yes, calmly, and offered to provide a copy. The line went quiet, then professional again. An hour later, another call, this time from legal. Their tone was careful, stripped of certainty. They asked how long the agreement had been in place. I answered honestly, 15 years, signed before policy revisions, never superseded, still binding. By midday, Elaine finally requested a meeting. Her confidence had thinned, but she masked it with irritation. She said the clause was outdated, unenforceable, symbolic at best. I listened without interrupting. When she finished, I reminded her that symbolic language doesn't stop payroll systems or audit access. Contracts do. She dismissed it as a stalling tactic. I let her. Control doesn't announce itself. It waits. That afternoon, HR formally notified leadership that my separation could not be completed without addressing the original agreement. My status remained unchanged. My authority, though limited by her interference, still existed on paper. I returned to my desk, opened my files, and worked, calmly, methodically. The resignation had been submitted. The clock had started. Elaine thought she had removed me. What she actually did was lock the door behind herself, leaving me inside, with time, documentation, and terms she could no longer ignore. I stayed silent. Knowing leverage grows strongest when misunderstood. When the other side rushes forward, believing the ground is solid, never checking whether it has already shifted beneath their confident steps. At this point, do you feel something is about to happen? I met Rachel Monroe 2 days later in a quiet office that smelled faintly of paper and coffee. She didn't waste time on sympathy. She asked for documents, timelines, and facts. That suited me. Emotion had already done its damage. Logic was safer. Rachel read my original employment contract line by line, marking sections with small tabs. She explained it plainly. First, profit sharing. The language entitled me to a percentage of net operating profit for every year beyond my initial term. It wasn't a bonus. It was deferred compensation, cumulative, and enforceable. Elaine's team had never accounted for it. Second, ownership of processes. Every operational framework I built that became embedded into daily workflow carried shared intellectual ownership. If the company continued using them after my departure, licensing applied. Rachel didn't dramatize it. She just calculated. Third, the separation clause. If I was forced out under threat or pressure, the company owed accelerated severance tied to tenure, not title. 15 years translated into numbers that no spreadsheet could soften. I listened, calm in a way I hadn't been since the meeting with Elaine. This wasn't revenge. It was structure revealing itself. Rachel totaled the figures once. Then again, she adjusted assumptions, checked conservative ranges, then looked up. This is significantly higher than they expect, she said. She was right. The board assumed I was another executive with a standard exit package. They had modeled a clean cut, a quiet transition, a press release in silence. They never imagined the past still had weight. Rachel sent a formal notice to HR and legal that afternoon. It outlined contractual obligations without threats or emotion, just citations and totals. The response didn't come immediately. Silence returned. Heavier this time, by evening. I felt something shift, not excitement, momentum. Elaine's authority depended on speed and confusion. Contracts slowed everything down. They forced attention. When Rachel called later, her tone had changed slightly. "They're asking for clarification," she said. "That means they're calculating exposure." I looked at my notes. My years reduced to clauses and values. For the first time, I understood how much of myself I had already been carrying without recognition. The company hadn't forgotten me. It had just hoped I would forget myself. I didn't. And now the numbers were awake, standing where my silence used to be, waiting to be acknowledged. I stayed calm, because calm kept me accurate. Every clause had a spine, every number a consequence. Elaine still thought this was administrative noise. It wasn't. It was history speaking in legal language. And it was finally loud enough that no one in that building could pretend not to hear. That realization settled in, but it refused to fade. Elaine didn't stay quiet once the numbers reached her desk. She moved fast, the way people do when they realize control is slipping. By the end of the week, rumors started circulating that I was unstable, disgruntled, difficult to work with, nothing official, nothing traceable, just enough noise to poison the room. I heard about it indirectly. A former colleague texted to ask if I was doing okay. Another warned me that my name had come up in a board sidebar, followed by the word leverage. Elaine framed it as concern. She suggested I was using outdated paperwork to pressure the company, that I was holding operations hostage. The irony would have been funny if it hadn't been deliberate. Then came the meeting. Not with me. Of course, I wasn't invited. I was discussed. The board questioned whether my claims constituted coercion. Someone used the word extortion. That word travels quickly when executives feel exposed. Elaine leaned into it, presenting herself as the calm reformer, dealing with a legacy employee who couldn't let go. Rachel warned me this would happen. When facts corner people, she said, they attack credibility. I stayed silent. Exactly as advised. Silence isn't weakness in rooms like that. It's absence, and absence makes assumptions expensive. Elaine escalated. She had HR circulate a memo outlining new compliance expectations, retroactively framing my actions as non-cooperative. She hinted that continued resistance could trigger internal review. She wanted me reactive. I didn't move. What I did notice was Hugh Nolan. The CFO stopped returning emails. In meetings where my name surfaced, his posture changed. He adjusted his glasses too often, tapped his pen, avoided eye contact. Hugh knew the numbers better than anyone. He also knew which ones didn't reconcile. During a follow-up call with legal, Hugh interrupted Elaine twice. Once to correct a timeline, once to question an assumption. It wasn't defiance, it was anxiety. The kind that leaks through controlled language. After the call, Rachel forwarded me a note. "Your CFO is nervous." She wrote, "That matters." It did. Elaine could posture. The board could speculate. But finance doesn't lie comfortably. Exposure doesn't spread evenly. It concentrates. By the end of the day, Elaine's narrative began to strain. Her confidence sharpened into aggression. Hugh's silence thickened. I felt the pressure rise. But it wasn't aimed at me anymore. They thought I was pushing. I wasn't. I was standing still while their own weight shifted against them, and when pressure builds without release, someone always cracks. This moment matters. Do you think I stayed silent or fought back? I didn't announce what I was doing. I simply logged in. My employee status hadn't changed. No matter how loudly Elaine insisted otherwise, payroll still listed me as active. Audit permissions still recognized my credentials. And the system did what systems always do when rules are followed. It let me in. I started where pressure usually hides. Not in summaries, but in raw transactions, vendor payments, consulting fees, licensing renewals. Elaine's team moved fast. Confident speed could replace oversight. I moved slower, methodically, following patterns instead of totals. At first, everything looked ordinary. Clean approvals, familiar vendors. But repetition tells its own story. The same consulting firm appeared again and again, always just under review thresholds. Always billed for strategic analysis no one could clearly describe. Dates clustered. Amounts varied slightly. Like someone avoiding symmetry, I cross-checked authorizations. Most approvals routed through Elaine's office. Stamped digitally, unquestioned. Hugh Nolan's name appeared too, but only as final acknowledgement. Never as originator. That mattered. It meant oversight had been reduced to rubber stamping. As I pulled earlier quarters, the pattern sharpened. Payments flowed out, then disappeared into layers of reclassification. Expense categories shifted mid-cycle. Notes were vague, documentation thin, none of it illegal on its own. Together, it formed direction. The pressure built as I realized what I was seeing. This wasn't negligence. It was design. I ran the vendor IDs through external registries, a habit from past risk assessments. One entity shared an address with two others. Different names, same formation agent. That raised the temperature. I paused, forced myself to stay precise. Accusations collapse without proof. I mapped timelines, matched transfers, traced reversals. Money left, returned briefly, then exited again under a different label. Circular movement meant concealment, not error. By late afternoon, I had enough to stop guessing. The consulting firm linked back to a holding company registered overseas. The holding company funneled funds into accounts that didn't interact with operations at all. They existed only to receive. I closed the files and leaned back. The pressure didn't ease, but it clarified. Elaine wasn't just aggressive, she was exposed. And Hugh knew it. His hesitation made sense now. He wasn't choosing sides. He was calculating survival. I documented everything carefully, time-stamped, duplicated, stored off network. I didn't alert anyone. I didn't confront Elaine. Control comes from sequence, not speed. When I shut down my terminal, nothing looked different. The office hummed, emails flowed. Elaine still believed I was bluffing. She wasn't looking behind her, and now I knew exactly what was waiting there. I walked out, knowing the data would outlast any meeting, any threat. Pressure works differently when facts exist. Every step Elaine took from here would leave tracks. She thought authority erased risk. I understood systems record everything. And once records align, momentum shifts without warning, without noise, until consequences arrive fully formed. That certainty hardened my resolve and marked the moment everything irreversibly turned forward now. The call came without warning. Not from Elaine, but from the board secretary, her voice careful and formal. She asked me to be available, not invited, just available, in case clarification was needed. That phrasing told me everything before the meeting even started. The board convened within hours. Elaine was not on the attendee list. Her calendar showed availability, but the room did not. That absence traveled fast through the building. People noticed. Silence followed. I stayed where I was. Documents open, posture neutral, waiting. Later, I learned what happened inside. Questions about financial exposure turned into demands for explanation. Elaine's language, usually sharp and rehearsed, failed her. She pushed growth narratives. The board pushed back with numbers. Someone asked who currently held signing authority. No one answered immediately. By the time legal weighed in, the decision was already forming. Temporary suspension of executive sign-off. Independent review. Elaine's authority narrowed to statements, not actions. Control shifted without ceremony, the way it always does when confidence evaporates. I was asked to provide documentation, not testimony. Documentation. I sent exactly what was requested. Nothing more. Dates, transactions, cross-references, no conclusions. Facts don't need framing when timing is right. What surprised me was how quickly relief turned into restraint. Satisfaction stayed internal. This wasn't victory. It was alignment. The board wasn't siding with me. They were protecting themselves. That distinction mattered. Elaine called me that evening. Her voice was calm but strained. She accused me of betrayal, of undermining leadership, of forcing chaos. I let her speak until she ran out of words. Then I told her the truth. I hadn't forced anything. I had simply stopped absorbing impact meant for others. The next morning, an external firm arrived. Official, quiet, efficient. Their presence wasn't announced. But it didn't need to be. They weren't there for optics. They were there for records. By noon, a rumor spread that regulators had been notified. No names, no confirmation. Just enough certainty to freeze speculation into fear. Someone had provided materials, not opinions. Materials. Elaine didn't return to the floor. Her access badge worked, but nothing opened for her anymore. Authority doesn't disappear loudly. It thins, then vanishes. I closed my files and waited. The satisfaction stayed contained, like pressure held under steel. I hadn't exposed her. I hadn't accused her. I had allowed truth to surface where it always does. In rooms you're no longer invited to, where decisions are made without you, and consequences finally stop being theoretical. I understood then that momentum no longer belonged to any single person. It belonged to process, oversight, and inevitability. Whatever came next would unfold without my intervention. That was the quiet satisfaction, knowing the system had corrected itself, and that correction would continue. Long after emotions burned out and names stopped mattering inside the company, I agreed to meet Elaine only after her attorney requested it in writing. Not a conversation, not reconciliation, a meeting. We sat across a narrow table while lawyers took notes and avoided eye contact. Elaine looked controlled, but the edges were gone. She opened with money, a settlement offer framed as generosity, paid quietly, contingent on my silence. She said it was practical, that everyone needed closure. I didn't react. Numbers don't respond to tone. I asked for the spreadsheet. My lawyer slid over our calculation instead. Profit sharing owed, licensing for processes still running, accelerated severance for forced departure. Each line sourced to contract language Elaine had ignored. The total landed heavier than her opening offer, and the room shifted. Elaine tried to negotiate with words. She mentioned reputation, future opportunities, unnecessary damage. I answered only with arithmetic, if they wanted speed. The number stood, if they wanted delay. The number increased with exposure. Fear has a price curve. Her attorney asked for a break. When they returned, Elaine's posture had changed. She agreed to most terms, pushed back on one. I declined without explanation. Control doesn't require justification. Eventually, she signed, not because she agreed, but because the alternative was worse. The agreement included payment, non-interference, and a non-disclosure clause drafted to protect her. She believed silence could still be purchased. What she didn't understand was timing. The documents she feared had already moved, not publicly, not dramatically, but correctly. Oversight doesn't reverse itself once engaged. The wire transfer cleared within days. I confirmed receipt and closed my claim. I didn't celebrate. Winning quietly keeps leverage intact. Elaine avoided me after that. She left early, spoke less, delegated more. Her authority existed on paper only. Whatever protection she thought she bought expired the moment the system noticed inconsistencies she could no longer explain. I walked away whole, not because I extracted revenge, but because I refused to trade truth for comfort. The deal ended our negotiation, not the consequences. Elaine thought she had paid for silence. In reality, she had paid for delay. And delay, when pressure is already applied, only narrows the exit. I remained detached, aware that fear makes people generous but careless. Elaine signed with shaking hands, convinced survival required speed. She never asked who else had copies or how processes move once initiated. Settlements, close disputes. Not investigations. By choosing secrecy, she accelerated scrutiny elsewhere. I left the building that day calm, balanced, and unhurried. Understanding advantage isn't loud, it's cumulative. Elaine bought time she no longer controlled, while momentum moved beyond her reach, guided by rules she could not renegotiate or escape. That outcome was inevitable once accountability entered systems to remember everything. The announcement didn't come with drama. It arrived as a brief internal notice, circulated early in the morning, factual and restrained. Elaine Carter had been placed on administrative suspension pending further review. No adjectives, no defense, just consequence. The room didn't react loudly, but the air changed immediately. People read it twice, then once more, as if confirming gravity. Within days, suspension turned into indictment. External investigators stepped in, followed by formal charges. The language hardened. What had been irregularities became violations. What had been oversight became intent. Elaine's name stopped appearing on agendas altogether. Systems adapted quickly once authority vanished. They always do. I watched from a distance. Not satisfaction, not relief. Something colder. Justice doesn't arrive with emotion. It arrives with paperwork, schedules, and deadlines that don't care how confident someone once sounded in a boardroom. Mark came to see me that week. He didn't sit down at first. He stood near the door, hands tight, voice low. He admitted he had known Elaine was planning to remove me. Not every detail, he said, but enough. Enough to stay quiet. Enough to warn her instead of me. He called it loyalty. I heard fear. He apologized without asking forgiveness. He said he thought it would pass, that Elaine would settle, that I would land somewhere else. He never considered what silence costs. By the time he finished, the distance between us felt permanent. I told him the truth calmly. That knowing and doing nothing is still a decision. That protecting power, while pretending neutrality, isn't harmless. He nodded, already understanding what was ending. The divorce paperwork followed the indictment closely. Two conclusions running in parallel, neither dramatic, both final. Our marriage didn't collapse. It concluded. Elaine's career did the same. Different paths, same outcome. Consequence doesn't discriminate between boardrooms and living rooms. Elaine's legal proceedings stretched on, but the result was inevitable. Charges stood. Assets were frozen. Her narrative disappeared under evidence. She stopped being discussed entirely. That was the sharpest punishment, irrelevance. I closed my file and stepped back fully. The company survived, altered but intact. Leadership changed, policies tightened, names rotated, systems corrected. Cold justice doesn't seek applause. It restores balance and moves on. I didn't feel victorious. I felt aligned. Everything that had been deferred arrived on schedule. Elaine lost her authority. Mark lost my trust. I lost nothing I hadn't already outgrown. When I walked away from it all, there was no speech, no turning point, just a quiet understanding that collapse rarely happens in a single moment. It unfolds in sequence, logical and unavoidable, until what once dominated everything becomes a footnote. And that was enough. I left the building without ceremony, carrying nothing but a thin folder and a clear sense of direction. There were no farewell emails, no last looks back. Closure doesn't require witnesses. What mattered was that my name was intact, my work acknowledged in legal language, and my future finally detached from someone else's control. The settlement funds arrived quietly, exactly as outlined. I didn't treat them as winnings. They were compensation, earned through years of systems built, crises absorbed, and decisions made when others hesitated. Money can't repair betrayal, but it can remove dependence. That freedom mattered more than the number itself. Within weeks, I began consulting independently. Companies reached out, not because of headlines, but because outcomes followed my work. I chose clients carefully. I chose timelines. I chose rest. Control returned, not as dominance, but as balance. The company I left continued operating, but something essential was gone. Without centralized knowledge, decisions slowed, authority fragmented. They survived, but they no longer shaped their own future. That wasn't punishment. It was consequence. I thought about Elaine once, briefly, not with anger, but with distance. I thought about Mark even less. Some endings don't need reflection to be complete. What remained was relief, not loud, not dramatic. A steady release of weight I hadn't realized I was carrying. I slept better. I worked cleaner. I trusted myself again. Leaving wasn't an act of revenge. Staying would have been. Walking away was the only honest response left to me. I learned that dignity grows when you stop explaining yourself, when you let systems speak, contracts stand, and time finish arguments no conversation ever could, and when you finally choose forward motion over endless defense without regret ever. I didn't bring them down. I just stopped keeping them standing. When I look back on this chapter, the lesson isn't about winning or losing. It's about knowing when to stop carrying weight that was never meant to be yours. I learned that loyalty without boundaries slowly turns into self-erasure, and silence only protects the people who benefit from it. What saved me wasn't anger or clever revenge, but clarity understanding my worth, trusting facts, and choosing dignity over approval. That shift changed everything inside me. If you're still here with me now, did you stay until the very end of this story? And more importantly, how are you feeling after hearing it when this video finishes? Do one small thing for yourself. Maybe step outside for a few minutes or straighten the space around you. Just enough to feel grounded again. Tell me where you're listening from. I genuinely want to know. And if this story resonated with you, please leave a comment, tap like, share it with someone who might need it, and subscribe to the channel. We're building something quiet, honest, and human here, and I'm glad you're part of it.